She hired a broken single dad as her driver and made him sign silence itself, never knowing his Navy SEAL past could change everything in one night. Welcome to Poor Girl's Destiny. We hope you're having a wonderful day filled with happiness, peace, and positivity. Stay with us and enjoy this story from beginning. The glass doors of Hale Dynamics Tower slid open with a soft mechanical whisper as Ethan Walker stepped inside, carrying nothing but a worn folder and the quiet weight of a man who had learned how to disappear into the world without leaving a trace. His faded jacket slightly too large for his frame, his shoes clean but clearly well used, while the lobby around him reflected a different universe entirely. Marble floors polished like mirrors, executives moving with sharp purpose, and the distant hum of power that seemed to belong to people who had never worried about tomorrow's rent. At the center of it all stood Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale Dynamics, composed and precise, her presence cutting through the room like a decision already made, and beside her, Marcus Reed, her security head, whose eyes immediately locked onto Ethan with quiet suspicion. "Ethan Walker?" Victoria asked without warmth, glancing at the file in her hand rather than at him, as if confirming a detail instead of acknowledging a person. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan replied calmly, his voice steady, respectful, and measured. She finally looked at him fully, her expression unreadable but firm. "You understand the terms of this position are temporary. 7 days. You drive when told, you wait when told, and you speak only when spoken to." There was no malice in her tone, only control, the kind of control built from boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions where hesitation meant weakness. Ethan simply nodded once. "Understood." Marcus narrowed his eyes slightly, stepping half a pace forward. "You have prior experience?" he asked, scanning Ethan like a puzzle that didn't quite fit the picture. Before Ethan could answer, Victoria raised a hand slightly, cutting the moment short. "I don't need a biography. I need reliability." Ethan's jaw tightened just enough to notice, but he said nothing, because silence had become easier than explanation. Liam Carter, the assistant, handed him a set of keys with a polite but distracted smile, gesturing toward the black luxury SUV waiting outside. "You'll start immediately," Liam said. "Airport run. After that, the CEO's schedule doesn't slow down." Ethan accepted the keys without hesitation, his fingers steady, his posture calm, as if he had done this exact motion 1,000 times before in a different life. Victoria turned away first, already moving on to the next obligation, but Marcus lingered for a second longer, his gaze still unsettled, as if something about Ethan's stillness didn't belong in their world. When Ethan stepped into the driver's seat of the SUV, the interior smelled like leather and expensive technology, every surface designed for people who expected the world to adjust for them. Yet he did not fidget, did not look impressed, only adjusted the mirror once and scanned the surroundings with quiet awareness that felt instinctive rather than learned. In the back seat, Victoria reviewed documents on a tablet, her voice occasionally issuing instructions that were crisp and efficient, while Ethan responded only when necessary, each answer short, precise, and devoid of emotion, which only reinforced her belief that he was exactly what she needed: uncomplicated, disposable, invisible. But Marcus, following in a separate vehicle, kept watching the driver through tinted glass, noticing how Ethan never rushed, never panicked, and never seemed surprised by anything happening around him, even in the chaotic rhythm of downtown traffic. At one red light, Victoria glanced up briefly, catching Ethan's reflection in the rearview mirror, and for a fraction of a second, she noticed something unusual, not defiance, not fear, but a kind of stillness that felt too controlled for a man she believed had nothing left to lose. "You always this quiet?" she asked suddenly, testing him more than conversing. Ethan met her reflection in the mirror, then returned his eyes to the road. "You asked me not to speak unless spoken to." The answer was simple, respectful, and final, yet it lingered in the air longer than expected, and for reasons she didn't yet understand. Victoria found herself looking out the window a little longer than usual, as if something about silence had just started to feel unfamiliar rather than comfortable. The SUV moved smoothly through the morning traffic of downtown Chicago, as Ethan Walker maintained a steady hand on the steering wheel, his posture calm but alert in a way that never seemed forced, while in the back seat Victoria Hale continued reviewing documents with sharp precision, occasionally marking notes on her tablet, as if the entire city outside the tinted windows was simply background noise to her decisions. The silence inside the vehicle was not empty but structured, shaped by her authority and his obedience to her rules. Yet beneath that surface something subtle was beginning to form, something Victoria did not yet have a name for. At exactly 9:15 a.m., her voice broke the quiet again, controlled and measured. "Take the next exit and head toward the corporate district," she said without looking up. "We have a meeting in 20 minutes. Ethan responded immediately. Understood. There was no hesitation in his tone, no unnecessary words, only execution, and that simplicity should have reassured her, but instead it created a faint irritation she could not fully explain. Marcus Reed's vehicle followed closely behind, and through the communication channel he maintained with the driver team, Marcus quietly observed every detail he could, noting how Ethan never checked the rearview mirror excessively, never reacted to honking horns, and never showed any stress even when traffic tightened around them near the highway interchange. In Marcus's experience, people revealed themselves under pressure, yet Ethan remained unchanged, like pressure did not register the same way for him. Meanwhile, in the back seat, Victoria finally closed her tablet for a moment and leaned back slightly, studying Ethan through the reflection in the window. "You do not ask many questions," she said, not as curiosity, but as evaluation. Ethan kept his eyes forward. "It is not my place." The answer was immediate and respectful, but it did not satisfy her curiosity, instead sharpening it. She had worked with executives, negotiators, and high-level consultants, all of whom tried to shape perception through conversation, yet this man did none of that. He simply existed in the role he was given, nothing more, nothing less. People who do not ask questions usually either know everything or know nothing, she said after a moment, testing the boundary again. Ethan's expression did not change. "Or they were trained to listen more than they speak," he replied calmly. The statement lingered in the air longer than expected, and for the first time Victoria looked up fully, her attention now directly on him rather than through reflection. Before she could respond, the SUV in front of them abruptly slowed due to construction congestion near the intersection ahead, forcing Ethan to reduce speed smoothly and maintain distance with precise control that felt almost instinctive. Marcus noticed it too from behind and muttered under his breath through the radio channel that the route had not been properly updated, while Victoria tapped her tablet once, visibly annoyed at the delay. "This city is inefficient," she said flatly. Ethan did not comment, but his eyes scanned the surroundings once, quickly and deliberately, noting pedestrian movement, vehicle angles, and the slight imbalance in traffic flow ahead. Victoria noticed the movement in his eyes and leaned slightly forward. "Do you always analyze everything like that?" she asked. Ethan paused briefly before answering. "It is just awareness." That answer, simple as it was, created another moment of silence, but this time Victoria did not immediately return to her documents. Instead, she continued watching him, as if the idea of awareness meant something different coming from him than from anyone else she had ever employed. Behind them, Marcus narrowed his eyes slightly, still unsettled by the contrast between Ethan's unremarkable appearance and his unusually controlled behavior. As the vehicle finally cleared the congestion and resumed speed toward the corporate tower, Victoria returned her attention to her schedule, yet something had shifted subtly in her perception, a faint recognition that the man she had hired as a driver was not reacting to her world the way most people did, and that realization, though unspoken, would not leave her mind for the rest of the morning. The corporate tower of Hale Dynamics rose above the city like a statement carved in glass and steel, and as the SUV pulled into the private entrance, Ethan Walker slowed the vehicle with precise control before aligning perfectly with the arrival zone, his movements smooth and intentional, as if every inch of space had already been measured in his mind, while Victoria Hale stepped out first without waiting for assistance, her heels striking the polished ground with authority that required no introduction, and Marcus Reed immediately scanned the perimeter before opening the rear door, his attention briefly lingering on Ethan, as if still searching for something hidden beneath the surface of a man who appeared too ordinary for the consistency of his behavior. Inside the building, the atmosphere shifted into a world of controlled urgency, employees moving with practiced efficiency, screens glowing with financial projections and global data streams, and Victoria walking through it all as if the building itself adjusted to her presence. Ethan followed at a respectful distance, staying close to the vehicle access protocol, but not intrusive, carrying himself with a calm discipline that made him almost invisible to the crowd, which was exactly how he seemed to operate in every environment he entered. "You will wait in the vehicle until I call for you," Victoria said without turning around as she entered the private elevator. Ethan nodded once. Understood. The elevator doors closed, leaving Marcus and Ethan momentarily in the same space, though separated by unspoken tension. Marcus crossed his arms, studying him openly now. "You do not seem like a driver who just started yesterday," Marcus said. Ethan kept his eyes forward. "People usually look like what they are required to be." Marcus narrowed his gaze slightly. "That is a careful answer." Ethan did not respond, and the silence that followed was not uncomfortable for him, only deliberate. In the executive conference level, Victoria entered a glass-walled meeting room where senior directors were already waiting, and the discussion immediately began with projections, market risks, and acquisition timelines. Victoria controlled the room effortlessly, responding to questions with precise confidence. But every few minutes her mind briefly returned to the driver waiting downstairs, not because he was important to the meeting, but because something about him refused to fit into the categories she had built her entire career around. Meanwhile, in the underground vehicle bay, Ethan remained in the driver's seat, engine off, hands resting lightly on the wheel, observing without appearing to observe, noticing patterns in movement, timing of security patrols, and subtle inconsistencies in visitor flow that most people would ignore entirely. Marcus returned briefly from the elevator lobby and stopped near the SUV, pretending to check something on his communication device, while actually watching Ethan through the tinted glass. After a few seconds, Marcus leaned slightly closer and spoke through the partially open window. "Where did you learn to drive like that?" he asked. Ethan finally turned his head slightly. "Like what?" Marcus studied him. "Precise. Predictive. You anticipate traffic before it happens." Ethan paused for a moment, then replied calmly, "Experience teaches patterns." Marcus did not look satisfied, but before he could continue, Liam Carter approached from the elevator corridor carrying a tablet. "The CEO will need the vehicle again in 40 minutes, Liam said quickly, glancing at Ethan as if trying to categorize him mentally. "There is an external meeting across town." Ethan nodded once, acknowledging without emotion. Marcus stepped back slightly, still watching him, then spoke in a lower tone to Liam. "Keep an eye on him," Marcus said quietly. Liam frowned. "Why?" Marcus did not answer immediately, his eyes still on Ethan. "Because people who do not react usually either have nothing to hide or everything to hide." In the SUV, Ethan heard none of it directly, but his awareness of the environment remained constant, his posture unchanged, his breathing steady. As above them the corporation continued its relentless rhythm of decisions and power, while beneath it, in the quiet space of observation, something unspoken was beginning to form around the man who had not yet revealed who he truly was. The morning meeting at Hale Dynamics had already shifted into its second hour when Victoria Hale finally paused mid-sentence, her eyes briefly narrowing at a financial projection on the glass screen wall, as if something in the numbers did not align with expectation. Yet her expression quickly returned to composed control as she continued speaking with precise authority, guiding the executives through acquisition strategy and market expansion without a single wasted word. While outside the conference room, Ethan Walker remained in the designated vehicle zone as instructed, his posture unchanged, his attention quiet, but constantly active in a way that did not look like observation but functioned exactly as such. Down in the lobby level, Marcus Reed was no longer pretending to be casual, his position now slightly adjusted so he could maintain a partial view of the vehicle bay, and every few minutes his eyes returned to Ethan, still trying to resolve the contradiction between appearance and presence. Liam Carter arrived again with updated instructions, glancing at Ethan while speaking. "The CEO will need immediate transport after the meeting. There may be a deviation in route depending on schedule changes." Ethan nodded once. "Understood." Liam hesitated for a fraction of a second, then walked away, but Marcus stepped closer after Liam left. "You are very calm for someone who works under this level of pressure," Marcus said, his tone measured but clearly probing. Ethan looked at him briefly. Pressure is only meaningful when it is unfamiliar. Marcus frowned slightly. That sounds like experience talking. Ethan did not confirm or deny it, and the silence that followed felt heavier to Marcus than any direct answer would have. In the conference room above, Victoria concluded the final segment of the meeting and dismissed her executives, leaving only her and a few senior advisors as she turned toward a private internal briefing. For a brief moment, her thoughts drifted again to the driver waiting below, and she found herself irritated at the persistence of that thought, as if her mind was attempting to assign importance where none should exist. 20 minutes later, the meeting concluded, and Victoria exited the conference room with her usual controlled pace, already reviewing the next agenda in her mind. Marcus met her near the elevator. "Vehicle is ready," he said. "No incidents." Victoria gave a slight nod. "Good." They descended together, but as the elevator doors opened to the lower level, a sudden disruption echoed from the building entrance as a delivery van had mistakenly blocked the primary exit lane, forcing security personnel to redirect traffic. It was not a dangerous situation, but it created a brief logistical delay that caused multiple vehicles to reposition. Victoria's expression tightened slightly. "We are already behind schedule," she said sharply. Marcus moved to coordinate with security. "It will be cleared in under 2 minutes." Ethan, who had already observed the situation forming before it escalated, had quietly repositioned the SUV without instruction, creating a cleaner exit angle through a secondary access lane that most drivers would not have considered due to its narrow clearance. When Victoria reached the vehicle, she paused for the first time, noticing it was already aligned and ready for departure. Marcus also noticed it and glanced toward Ethan with a sharper look than before. "Did you move the vehicle on your own?" Marcus asked. Ethan answered calmly. "It was necessary for clearance." Victoria studied the alignment for a moment before entering the back seat, saying nothing at first, but her gaze lingered slightly longer than usual as she settled in. When the doors closed, she finally spoke. "You anticipated a blockage that had not fully formed yet," she said. Ethan kept his eyes forward. "It was a probability, not a prediction." Victoria leaned back slightly, her tone quieter now. "Most people wait for instructions." Ethan replied without turning. "Waiting often costs time." The statement hung in the air as the SUV pulled away smoothly, merging into traffic with precise control, while behind them Marcus remained standing for a moment longer, watching the vehicle disappear into the city flow, his expression no longer simply suspicious, but now uncertain in a way he did not fully understand, as if something about the man he was observing no longer fit within any simple explanation. The city traffic had thickened as the SUV moved away from Hale Dynamics Tower, merging into the late morning rhythm of Chicago where buses, taxis, and delivery trucks competed for every inch of asphalt. While inside the vehicle, Victoria Hale had shifted from her earlier focus on schedules into a quieter state of thought, her tablet resting idle on her lap as she stared out the window with a rare absence of immediate calculation, as if the recent small disruptions in timing and prediction had created a subtle fracture in her sense of control. Ethan Walker maintained steady driving as always, hands relaxed but precise on the wheel, posture unchanged, his attention distributed across multiple layers of awareness that did not appear outwardly but functioned continuously, tracking distance, speed flow, and surrounding vehicle behavior with calm consistency. In the back seat, Victoria finally broke the silence. "You seem to handle uncertainty without hesitation," she said, her tone less formal than before. Ethan responded without looking back. "Uncertainty is always present. Most people just choose to ignore it." Victoria considered that for a moment, her gaze still fixed outside. "That is a very unusual way to describe traffic." There was a faint pause before Ethan replied. "Traffic is just a visible version of decision-making under pressure." The answer made her glance toward him more directly now, as if trying to determine whether he was speaking from experience or theory. Marcus Reed, following behind in the secondary vehicle, noticed something unusual developing in the convoy rhythm. Ethan was maintaining spacing and lane positioning not just correctly, but with an efficiency that reduced friction in the entire route, subtly improving flow in a way that even professional drivers rarely achieved without training. Marcus spoke into his communication device quietly. "He is adjusting the route dynamically," he said, "not following it." Liam Carter, seated in the passenger side of the lead vehicle for coordination, responded after checking the navigation system. That is not in the assigned protocol. Marcus's tone tightened slightly. I know. Meanwhile, ahead on the route, an unexpected event unfolded as a minor collision between two delivery vans caused a temporary slowdown on a key intersection ramp, creating a chain reaction of braking vehicles and partial blockage. Before any instruction was given from the escort coordination channel, Ethan had already identified the developing congestion and adjusted lane positioning early, signaling and shifting into a parallel route that maintained forward motion while avoiding full-stop delay. Victoria noticed the change immediately. You changed direction, she said. Ethan replied evenly. The original route was becoming inefficient. You did not receive instruction, she responded. No, Ethan said calmly. It was not required. That answer created a brief silence in the vehicle, longer than the words themselves, as Victoria studied him with increasing attention, her analytical mind attempting to categorize behavior that did not fit conventional driver protocol. In the following minutes, the SUV continued through the adjusted path smoothly, bypassing the congestion entirely, while the trailing vehicle adjusted accordingly under Marcus's direction. When they finally rejoined the main avenue, Victoria leaned slightly forward. You are not reacting like someone performing a temporary job, she said. Ethan kept his gaze forward. A job does not change how awareness functions. Victoria narrowed her eyes slightly, then leaned back again, her expression unreadable but clearly more engaged than before. For the first time since hiring him, she was no longer simply evaluating his performance, but quietly recalibrating her understanding of him. While behind them Marcus remained silent for several seconds, his suspicion no longer centered on threat or deception, but on something harder to define. The possibility that the man driving for them was operating on a level none of them had initially accounted for. The late afternoon light had begun to fade into a softer gold as the SUV returned toward Hale Dynamics Tower, the city traffic loosening slightly, but still carrying the steady pulse of movement and noise, while inside the vehicle a subtle shift in atmosphere had formed over the last hour, no longer defined only by instruction and response, but by a growing awareness that neither Victoria Hale nor Marcus Reed was willing to openly acknowledge. Ethan Walker continued driving with the same controlled precision as before, yet now the silence felt different, heavier in a way that suggested anticipation rather than routine. Victoria sat in the back seat with her tablet untouched, her thoughts no longer fully on business projections, but intermittently returning to the man in the front seat, whose behavior refused to align with the category she had assigned him. Marcus, in the trailing vehicle, maintained his position, but his attention had become sharper, more focused, as if he were waiting for something to confirm or collapse his suspicion entirely. At approximately 5:43 p.m., Ethan's eyes subtly shifted through the rearview mirror, registering a pattern in surrounding traffic that did not match normal commuter flow. A black unmarked vehicle had appeared twice within a short span of time at different intersections, maintaining distance but consistently repositioning in ways that were not random. He did not react outwardly, but his awareness adjusted immediately, recalibrating route probability and spacing without altering speed. Victoria finally spoke. We are running late for the evening review, she said. Ethan responded calmly. We will arrive within margin. Marcus, through the communication channel, suddenly interjected. There is an unidentified vehicle maintaining proximity to the convoy. The tone was controlled but firm. Victoria's expression shifted slightly. Security detail? She asked. Marcus replied after a brief pause. Not registered in our system. Ethan remained silent, but his posture subtly changed, not tense, but fully attentive now. The SUV turned onto a wider avenue where traffic was thinner, bordered by construction zones and partially closed pedestrian pathways as the city transitioned into evening flow. It was here that Ethan made a quiet decision to adjust route behavior again, not abruptly, but with subtle deviation that guided them toward a less populated corridor lined with office buildings and service access roads. Victoria noticed immediately. That is not the scheduled route, she said. Ethan replied evenly. It reduces exposure. Marcus's voice tightened in the rear communication channel. Exposure to what exactly? Ethan did not answer directly, because at that same moment the black unmarked vehicle reappeared, closer now, matching speed more deliberately than before. The air inside the SUV shifted instantly, not with panic, but with recognition that something had changed from observation to intention. Victoria's hand tightened slightly on the edge of her seat as she followed Ethan's gaze through the mirror for the first time with full attention. "Explain," she said, her voice controlled but no longer casual. Ethan's response was calm and immediate. "Stay seated and remain silent." The instruction was not said with authority in the corporate sense, but with the certainty of someone who had assessed variables beyond what others could yet see. Marcus, now fully alert, moved his vehicle closer behind, attempting to close protective distance. The unmarked vehicle accelerated slightly. Ethan adjusted speed in response, guiding the SUV into a narrower service corridor between buildings where ambient light dropped and external traffic became minimal. Victoria leaned forward now, her voice quieter. "Ethan, what is happening?" For a brief moment, he did not answer, his attention fully divided across distance, angle, and movement. Then he spoke. "We are being observed in a controlled follow pattern." Marcus responded immediately. "Confirmed. I am initiating intercept communication with security." But before any coordinated response could stabilize, the trailing unmarked vehicle surged closer into the corridor entrance, forcing Marcus to adjust sharply behind them. Ethan maintained steady control, but his route now prioritized separation over schedule, guiding the SUV deeper into the corridor where visibility narrowed and external witnesses decreased. Victoria's breathing remained steady, but her eyes were now locked on Ethan with an intensity that had not been present before. "You anticipated this," she said. Ethan kept his focus forward. "I recognized probability indicators earlier today." The statement landed differently now, no longer abstract, but immediate. As the corridor narrowed further ahead, Ethan's posture remained unchanged, yet every movement now carried the quiet certainty of someone who had shifted from driving to protection without announcement. While behind them Marcus continued attempting coordination, and the city around them faded into a quieter, more isolated stretch of road where control no longer belonged to schedule or authority, but to awareness alone. The narrow service corridor stretched between two long office structures, its lighting dimmer and more fragmented as the SUV moved deeper into the restricted passage, where echoes of distant city noise faded into a controlled silence broken only by the sound of tires against concrete. While behind them Marcus Reed continued attempting to coordinate support through secure channels that were now responding with delay due to the unpredictability of the situation. Inside the SUV, Victoria Hale remained unusually still, her earlier questions no longer spoken aloud, replaced by a focused observation of Ethan Walker, whose entire presence had shifted into something more concentrated, not tense in a visible way, but fully engaged, as if every sense had been recalibrated to match the environment around them. The unmarked vehicle that had been following them entered the corridor entrance more slowly now, maintaining distance but continuing its pattern of pursuit, and that confirmation alone was enough for Ethan to adjust his driving behavior into a more deliberate protective formation, subtly positioning the SUV closer to structural cover points along the corridor while maintaining forward movement. Victoria finally spoke again, her voice quieter than before. "This is not a standard security issue, is it?" Ethan kept his eyes forward. "No." That single word carried more weight than any explanation could have, and Marcus, hearing it through the communication line, tightened his focus immediately. "We have assistance incoming in approximately 3 minutes, Marcus stated, attempting to stabilize the situation with protocol. Ethan responded calmly, not to Marcus but to the environment itself. 3 minutes may not align with current conditions. The unmarked vehicle behind them began to close distance more decisively, and for the first time Victoria felt a shift in her own perception, not fear, but a realization that control had subtly transitioned away from systems she understood. Ethan reduced speed slightly, then guided the SUV into a sharper alignment toward a secondary exit route that most navigation systems would ignore due to its narrow clearance and limited accessibility. The decision was immediate and precise, and as the vehicle turned, Victoria instinctively braced herself as the surroundings shifted into a tighter structural passage between buildings where visibility decreased significantly. "You are changing direction again," she said, her tone now more questioning than directive. Ethan answered evenly. "We are entering a controlled exit corridor." Marcus, now fully engaged, attempted to track both vehicles through alternate sight lines, but found the corridor geometry reducing his ability to maintain direct visual confirmation. "I am losing line of sight," Marcus said. Ethan did not respond verbally, but his driving became even more deliberate, positioning the SUV near a structural barrier that limited approach angles from behind. At that moment, the unmarked vehicle attempted to match the turn into the corridor, but its approach slowed unexpectedly as Ethan's positioning created a natural obstruction in trajectory alignment, forcing it to reduce speed. Inside the SUV, Victoria turned her attention fully toward Ethan for the first time without distraction. "How did you know this route existed?" she asked. Ethan paused briefly before answering. "It is not about knowing. It is about recognizing what remains and used in predictable systems." The answer unsettled her in a way she could not immediately articulate, because it suggested understanding that went beyond corporate logistics or standard navigation. Marcus suddenly spoke again, urgency now present but controlled. "Support units are approaching from North Entry Point." Ethan acknowledged with a slight shift in posture. "Good timing." The SUV came to a controlled stop near a junction point where the corridor opened slightly into a secondary service exit. Ethan placed the vehicle in neutral and for the first time opened his door without hesitation. Victoria watched him closely. "What are you doing?" she asked. Ethan stepped out calmly, scanning the corridor with quiet precision, then spoke in a low, steady voice that carried authority without volume. "Remain inside the vehicle." Marcus immediately reacted through the channel. "Ethan, confirm your status." Ethan replied without turning back, maintaining perimeter awareness. The unmarked vehicle behind them also slowed to a near stop, now uncertain in its positioning due to the sudden change in spatial dynamics. Ethan moved a few steps forward into the corridor opening, not aggressively, but with deliberate positioning that placed him between the SUV and the approaching uncertainty, his presence no longer that of a driver, but of someone fully aware of tactical environment mapping. Victoria remained seated, her eyes fixed on him now with a level of attention that had completely replaced her earlier assumptions. For the first time since hiring him, she was not observing an employee, but someone whose behavior suggested a history far deeper than anything listed in a file. And in the silence that followed, the entire corridor seemed to narrow around a single unresolved question of who Ethan Walker truly was before the moment he chose to remain silent. The corridor had fallen into a tense stillness, broken only by the distant hum of city infrastructure and the faint echo of approaching vehicles repositioning outside the narrow service passage. While Ethan Walker stood between the SUV and the open stretch ahead, with a controlled calm that did not match the uncertainty surrounding them, his posture steady, eyes scanning without urgency, but with complete environmental awareness that suggested preparation rather than reaction. Inside the SUV, Victoria Hale remained seated but fully focused now, her earlier composure replaced by concentrated attention on Ethan's every movement, while Marcus Reed's voice continued through the communication channel, tighter than before as external support units adjusted their approach routes. "We are closing in from North Entry," Marcus confirmed. Ethan responded without turning his head. "Maintain distance until visual alignment is confirmed." The statement was not directive in tone, but carried the certainty of someone accustomed to coordinating under unpredictable conditions, and for a brief moment Marcus hesitated before complying. The unmarked vehicle that had been following them remained stationary at the corridor entrance now, its positioning uncertain, as if reassessing the situation based on Ethan's sudden change in control of the environment. Victoria finally spoke again, her voice quieter but sharper. "You are not just a driver," she said. Ethan did not respond immediately, his attention still scanning the corridor geometry and exit angles. After a moment, he replied, "That depends on the definition of the role." Victoria studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "No driver I have ever hired analyzes space like this." Ethan remained calm. "Most drivers are trained to follow routes. I am trained to evaluate them." The statement lingered, and Marcus, hearing it, paused in his tracking adjustments as if recalibrating his understanding of Ethan in real time. At that moment, distant footsteps and coordinated movement became faintly audible from the far end of the corridor as support units finally approached the designated area, their presence marked by controlled positioning rather than urgency. Ethan shifted slightly, aligning himself more precisely between the SUV and the corridor opening, not blocking movement, but ensuring controlled access. Victoria noticed the change immediately. "What are you expecting?" she asked. Ethan replied evenly. "Confirmation." The word was simple, but its implication was not, and Marcus responded through the channel. "We have visual contact. Units are on site." Only then did Ethan subtly relax his stance, though he did not fully withdraw from his position. The corridor began to fill with structured security presence, verifying the situation and establishing perimeter stabilization, while the unmarked vehicle at the entrance remained still, no longer advancing. Victoria slowly stepped out of the SUV for the first time during the incident, her heels touching the concrete as she moved closer to Ethan, her expression no longer purely analytical but layered with something closer to realization. "You handled that entire situation without waiting for instruction," she said. Ethan glanced briefly toward her. Waiting would have reduced outcome probability. Marcus approached from the opposite side, now fully present in the scene, his expression serious but no longer purely suspicious. "Your response patterns do not match any civilian driving profile I have seen," Marcus stated. Ethan responded calmly. "Because my experience is not defined by civilian profiles." The silence that followed was no longer tense, but heavy with implication, as Victoria looked between Marcus and Ethan, recognizing that both men were now reaching the same conclusion from different angles. Ethan Walker was not simply operating outside expectation. He was functioning within a framework none of them had yet identified. As the security units secured the corridor and the situation stabilized completely, Ethan finally stepped back toward the SUV, resuming his position as if nothing had changed. Yet the way Victoria watched him now had fundamentally shifted, because what she had just witnessed was not reaction under pressure, but control under certainty. And that distinction was beginning to reshape everything she believed about the man she had hired. The corridor outside Hale Dynamics remained under controlled security presence as the situation fully stabilized, with coordinated personnel confirming that all external anomalies had been resolved and the area was now secure for normal operations, while the evening lights softened across the concrete and glass structures, casting long reflections that made the entire scene feel quieter, almost unreal after the intensity of the moments that had just passed. Inside this controlled calm, Ethan Walker had already returned to his position beside the SUV, his movements unhurried and deliberate, as if nothing had shifted internally despite everything that had occurred externally, while Victoria Hale stood a few steps away from him, no longer observing him as a hired driver, but as something she had not yet fully defined in her understanding. Marcus Reed remained nearby, his posture less defensive now and more contemplative, as if the conclusions he had drawn earlier were being reshaped by the reality he had just witnessed. Victoria finally broke the silence, her voice no longer carrying the same corporate distance it had earlier in the day. "Everything you did back there was not part of any driver protocol I have ever seen," she said. Ethan met her gaze briefly but calmly. "Driver protocol is not designed for every situation," he replied. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his tone more measured than before. "Your situational awareness and spatial control were consistent with trained operational response experience," he said. Ethan did not deny it, but he also did not elaborate. The silence that followed was different now, not filled with suspicion, but with recognition forming slowly under uncertainty. Victoria studied him for several seconds, her expression shifting between analysis and realization. "Who exactly are you?" she asked directly. Ethan paused, not out of hesitation, but out of consideration for the simplicity of the answer she might expect. "I am someone who is no longer where I used to be," he said calmly. The answer did not satisfy curiosity, but it changed the tone completely, because it confirmed that there was a past he was deliberately not offering freely. Marcus exhaled slightly, stepping back as if allowing space for that realization to settle. "You should have disclosed this during hiring," Marcus said, though without accusation now. Ethan responded evenly. "You hired a driver. I performed the role you assigned. Victoria looked away briefly, processing the weight of that statement, before returning her gaze to him. You reduced an unpredictable situation into controlled outcomes without instruction, she said. Ethan nodded once. That is what awareness does when it is trained. There was no arrogance in his tone, only clarity, and that clarity made the distance between them feel even greater than before. For a moment, no one spoke, and the city around them continued its normal rhythm, unaware of the shift that had just occurred in this small pocket of space between power, perception, and identity. Then Victoria took a step closer, her voice softer but more intentional. I do not know what your past was, she said, but I know enough now to understand it is not ordinary. Ethan met her eyes briefly, then looked toward the SUV. The past is not relevant to the present task, he said. Marcus frowned slightly. That is not a complete answer, he said. Ethan turned his attention to him calmly. It is the only one that matters in this context. The statement left Marcus silent, not because he disagreed, but because it was difficult to challenge. Victoria slowly nodded, as if accepting a reality she had not anticipated when she hired him. Your contract was for a driver position, she said after a moment. Ethan replied simply, then I have fulfilled it. He reached for the keys, placing them on the hood of the vehicle with steady precision, then stepped back. Victoria watched him closely. Where will you go now? She asked. Ethan looked toward the street beyond the corridor, where the city lights were beginning to rise into evening visibility. Where there is nothing requiring explanation, he said. Marcus remained still, watching as Ethan adjusted his jacket slightly and turned away from the vehicle, not in urgency, not in escape, but in completion. Victoria did not stop him, though something in her expression suggested she understood that whatever connection had formed in the last several hours had not ended in conflict or resolution, but in recognition. Ethan Walker walked toward the exit of the corridor with the same quiet discipline he had carried from the beginning, leaving behind a silence that no longer felt empty, but full of unanswered understanding, as Victoria stood watching him disappear into the flow of the city, realizing only then that she had not hired an ordinary man, but had unknowingly placed trust in someone whose past was built on a level of experience she was only beginning to comprehend. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. We truly appreciate your time and support. Tell us what you think in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful and emotional stories like this. Stay safe, stay inspired, and we will see you in the next story.